Okay, is everyone ready to start? Yes, no? Okay, yes. Okay, well, welcome here to our presentation, Creativity, It's Not Mickey Mouse. Alan Frank and I are both from the Corporate Design Group. And what we are presenting are observations on creativity. I want to be very blunt and straightforward in saying that Alan and I are not creativity consultants. We are giving you our observations. Vocation-wise, I'm an engineer, and Alan is a human factors expert. So don't confuse us as being consultants in creativity, but we have lots to share with you. An interesting thing is how this whole presentation started. My half, which focuses more on personal creativity, was a byproduct from some activities outside of BNR. And Alan's part of the presentation started off as a result of a trip report from the course he took at Disney University on the creative leadership process. So one day, Alan and I, back in the fall, ran into each other in the cafeteria. We started talking about a few things, and we both realized we had presentations on creativity that we could both put together. So we started working away at it. We have already done this presentation a few times externally and a couple of times internally. And as we have been progressing through this, this presentation has been evolving in a number of very interesting ways. So if anybody has already seen this and you're here, what you've seen before, you may not recognize this time around. Now, there's one thing I'd like to bring to your consciousness, and that this presentation here is interactive. So I do like you to participate, to ask questions, to challenge our ideas. If you have ideas of your own that you want to share, don't be shy. Please put your hand up and express them. And we will be having some interactive exercises. And with these exercises, you're not supposed to be shy, and you're supposed to be very spontaneous. And we must remember that we all have dignity. So whatever someone says, it's not stupid, and it's not silly. So what I want to do now is to introduce you to the microphone algorithm. What we're going to do is that when we have the interactive exercises, you will be studying the visual on the screen, and then the microphone will be passed around the room, and you will be asked to answer a particular question which pertains to the visual. Once you've answered your question, you take the microphone and you pass it to someone else. It could be the person in front of you, behind you, beside you, across the aisle, or whatever. But we will make sure that the microphone traverses the gym or the auditorium quite well. Now, we may as well just put the algorithm into place. And what we're going to do is a first exercise, and the exercises will be taken from modern art simply because I find it's a good mechanism to use. It has no bearing on anyone's taste in art here, so we will make sure that we keep it fun. And what we're going to do is study this particular slide, and you'll get a minute to study it, and then the microphone will go around the room. And in it, once the microphone gets to you, you're going to say, what is the problem here? Or what is the story here? Or what is the feeling of this here? Or how do you interpret this visual? You have to remember that we are all creative, and we're all creative in certain environments and in certain periods of time, but we also need a bit of warming up. So your minute is going to start now. Okay, your minute is up, and I will pick someone to start off. We have a volunteer. We'll go through 10 people.
This is definitely a prototype for a floor tile for the kitchen called Never Needs Cleaning.
Very good. Pass it to someone. Anybody. You're next.
There's a lot of colorful white and black in there.
Okay.
I see it as a painter's drop sheet. He had a sort of off-brown drop sheet. He was painting a house for somebody who liked earth colours. And the final layer was the windows, which were done on white.
This gives me an impression of chaos, or not getting anywhere.
Looks to me like candle wax on the beach.
This is the DMS uses relationship diagram.
Two things come to mind. First one is $1.6 million. Second one is it looks like the internet connection on the network.
It's a painting of a multi-ethnic dance club.
I see conflict, and the best part of it, the little bit of white leads us to hope.
Okay, and one more person.
It looks like a expression of someone's frustration.
Okay. Now, is there anyone in the audience who is really dying to tell us what they see and they want to have a turn? Put your hand up and the microphone will come to you.
It would be the person way behind the camera angle.
I see a native powwow. The tom-toms are driven the people to a wild frenzy, and they've got their war paints on, and they're just violently going around, excited.
Very good. Anyone else?
It looks like my garden after I haven't weeded it for 3 days.
Okay, is there anyone from one of the remote sites that would like to contribute? Since I haven't heard anything, I assume not. As you've seen, we've all, or within the group, we've come up with very, very unique and very varied interpretations as to what we saw here, and that's all very, very good. And just to give you the perspective in which the particular artist did this piece, it was done by Jackson Pollock back in 1950, and he entitles it Autumn Rhythm. So within himself, he sees the autumn colors, the rhythm of the leaves, moving about, and so on and so forth. But the fact that many of us here have seen something else is just as valid and just as creative. Now, creativity begins with an attitude, and that attitude harnesses certain powers. But oh, by the way, we also run into blocks for the whole creative process. So what I'm going to do right now is to begin with the creative attitude. And we have a few listed here, being the positive mindset, relax, suspend judgment, open awareness and perceptions, and then allow yourself to be creative. Now, with the positive mindset, experiments have shown that simply mere suggestion to someone that they are creative enhances their creative abilities. Similar to the children's story where the train was told, well, yes, you could make it up the hill. If you tell someone else you are creative, that really boosts their creative ability. The second one, to relax. In order to be creative, you must stay loose. The creative ideas must be allowed to emerge. They simply cannot be forced. So if you try to be rational, controlled, and very orderly in the initial phases of the creative process, creativity simply will not emerge. You're simply shutting off that particular valve, and you won't be able to get much further. We also have to become responsive to our rhythms and become receptive to them. And within your own selves, think about when you are most creative. It could be during a particular time of day. It could be in particular environments. And it could also be in particular situations or with certain mediums. And once you're able to identify that, then you can utilize your creative powers much more effectively. And we also need the time to warm up. You simply don't turn on and turn off in terms of creativity. You may have a period of just building up. The third one, the suspending judgment, this involves the issue that criticism and evaluation inhibit creative thinking. So when someone says to you, that's a good idea, but what they're doing is that they're inhibiting that person's creativity, but they're also hampering their own because they're not waiting to explore other ideas. There is a proper time and place for the evaluation phase, but not when you're in the inspiration phase. We must also open our awareness and perceptions, and the creative attitude is a questioning, searching state of mind. To be creative, you have to be very, very sensitive to problems and their implications. So you really have to strive for a heightened sense of awareness, and to make sure your perceptions are very sharp, responsive, and authentic. And then finally, you have to allow yourself to be creative. And in order to do that, you need to have a sense of psychological safety, which we're trying to establish in this room as we go through the examples. Now, no matter how ridiculous, bizarre, or silly you may appear to yourself or to others, you simply have to accept your own self-worth and what you have to contribute to the process. And one of the important parts of this is that you have to be able to allow yourself to respond and react spontaneously. Now, this takes us to the next interactive exercise, and keeping in mind our creative attitude and how sensitive we've become within these first few minutes. Again, this is another piece of art, and what we're going to do here is to take 1 minute to, again, study it, and then to answer the question, what is her problem? What is she feeling? What is her situation? Okay, go. Okay. Okay, your time is up, and the microphone will start on the other side of the room this time.
I think the expression on her face, to me, indicates that she's not looking forward to something that's happening. Maybe she's in a long line out of the picture. There's a whole bunch of people in front of her. And the other thing I think of is she maybe doesn't care about her appearance in public because she's curlers and slippers and cigarette in her mouth, so she has that kind of attitude maybe.
Pass it anywhere.
Basically, I see it as a character study in general. This is a portrait of a tough old broad. Obviously, matriarch of a fairly large family with that shopping cart full, and nobody's going to push her around. And she's just getting some of the routine out of the way.
Just pass it on to anybody.
I'd title this Trapped. I see this person as being trapped in a few different society edges. One being trapped in the fact that she's overburdened, has too much to do, not enough time for herself, judging by the physical appearance. I'd also challenge it and call it trapped because it seems like it's a man in a woman's costume.
I love some of the expressions. Notwithstanding the color, I see that it's basically a gray, everyday tone there, and I agree with the previous one. It's imprisonment of some type in a gray world.
I'd say this lady is completely strung out. That might be a joint in her mouth, and so somehow she has somehow found her way into one of the main corridors of the Pentagon, where she is presently going to be apprehended.
Well, I see her wearing nice bright clothes and her hair is in curlers, so I think she's just waiting to get out and have some fun, but right now she's overly burdened with her house chores.
It's hypoallergenic. You can touch it.
Okay, one more.
I think she's caught between the present and the future. She's really worried about what's going on, but part of her's still stuck in the past.
Okay, is there anyone out there who really, really wants to say their piece? Yes.
She's shocked till she dropped.
What do you mean 8 items or less?
Maybe because I'm standing so far away, I can't really see her facial expression. But at this point, with the color and the dress, it seems she's very relaxed and she doesn't really care what's going on, and almost like a Caribbean and have a good time.
Okay, do we have any contributions from any of the remote sites? Okay, I assume not, since I haven't heard anything. Again, this is a piece of art. Yes? Someone say anything?
From Rochester.
Oh, yes.
Earthquake aftermath.
Thank you. Okay, so again, this is a piece of art. It's done by Dwayne Hansen back in 1969, and he titles it Woman with a Shopping Cart. But, but one thing I really want you to observe here is, or a few things. The first one being the variety of perceptions people have when you all look at the same thing, and the sensitivity one has when interpreting something. And the other one is, as you're doing these exercises, become very much in tune with yourself on how your mind starts to search for patterns or relationships, on how all these things fit together, and how you become inspired with ideas. Now, in terms of creativity, we also have a lot of energy, and that energy we need to harness. And we can call it creative energy. And it can come from things like our heritage, our intuition, our environment, and goodness knows what else. And please feel free to contribute what other sources of energy we may have. And again, as we continue through this presentation, be very much aware of what our creative energies are. Aside from the creative attitude and the energy, we also need some freedom to create. And we're presenting here 4 different planes where we can explore this freedom. Since I'm looking more at the personal creativity, I'll be focusing on the emotional, perceptual, and cultural freedoms. We also have the need for organizational freedom, and Alan will be presenting that in the context of the Disney organization. And it's very important that we have these particular freedoms to create, because if we don't, then they become blocks. And once they become blocks, we must address those in order to be able to free ourselves to become effective when it comes to problem solving. So looking at emotional freedom, we have a few here on the list. There is lack of fear, healthy self-esteem, proper motivation, suspended judgment, and the tolerance for chaos. Now, the lack of fear is something that's very important for us to have in order to be free to create, because fear tends to be one of the most common and disabling emotional blocks. One is very much afraid to appear stupid, or of making a mistake, or of failing, and so on and so forth. And people tend to go to extraordinary lengths to avoid failure of any kind. And we can take typical situations as people going to a dance. If someone doesn't think that they can dance well, they will not dance at all. People searching for jobs, they're afraid of not getting the interview, or getting rejected after an interview, so they won't even bother making career moves or job moves of any sort. Here's a plug for modern art. We can be very, have a lot of respect for modern art, because the artists certainly don't have much fear in expressing what they want to show or what they want to communicate. And the ability to ask questions is very much essential to creativity, and if you're frightened to ask a question, then you can't move on to the next step. We also have, we need the freedom emotionally and in terms of having a very healthy self-esteem. Because if you don't have this healthy balance between self-esteem, you can get yourself trapped in one of 2 ways. If you're so overly confident, then you become so smug you won't go searching for other solutions to the problem. If you have very low self-confidence, you may not express what your idea is. So you need to have a balance to the self-esteem issue. We all have a deep need to conform and to belong to a group. So in terms of being creative, it also often implies that you must be very different in terms of your thoughts or your solutions to problems. So really try to cultivate a very healthy self-esteem. We've got proper motivation, and creativity often blooms best in an environment of relaxed awareness. And we also have to watch out for lack of challenges and overzealousness. And we also tend, on top of this, have a frustration threshold. And once we reach a certain point of frustration, it's as if we have an automatic shut-off valve in terms of our own creativity. That's perfectly normal, but be very much aware of it so that you can overcome it. We've got suspended judgment, and what this means is that in order to be creative, you must come up with an abundance of ideas. But if they're judged too quickly, those ideas won't come out as much. So what you need to do is to suspend judgment on these ideas so that you can search for more solutions to your problems. So what you need to do is to foster an environment that's very positive, not one that's negative or judgmental. And finally, with our emotional freedom, we need to have a tolerance for chaos. So in order to be creative, you must allow your mind to relax, defer closure, and incubate on a problem. You have to be mentally messy for a while, because from that chaos, you know that good ideas will eventually emerge. Moving on, our next type of freedom is perceptual freedom. And to be creative, you must perceive a problem very clearly and correctly. So what we have here are three avenues: accurate problem definition and data, using the right approach, and using all of your abilities. Now, with the accurate problem definition and data, just think back. How often have you been given a problem that was very, very poorly defined? That seems to be pretty common. And what starts to happen is that instead of redefining the problem in a correct manner, one tends to want to solve the problems as quickly as possible and move on to the next one. And one good example of that is, the numerous assignments one has in university, 5 or 6 each week, and you just pump them out one by one as if they're coming off a conveyor belt. Well, that doesn't give you much time to really think about what you're doing. Now, with problem definition, if you start off with a poorly defined problem, it often results in a very poorly considered solution. So be very, very careful in being conscientious of examining a problem from many different points of view in order to clarify it and to be able to be very sensitive to the problem, and which leads you then to suggest different solutions. We've also got the one issue with incorrect data, and if you're given wrong information, you're going to be returning wrong information. We also want to use the right approach. If you're to try to solve a mathematical equation simply with words, that can be a little clumsy. If you try to describe the Mona Lisa with equations, that's just purely ludicrous. But we tend to do these sorts of things. So what we want to do is to use the right combination of languages, or just the right language, in order to fully articulate your own creativity. Now, what do I mean by languages? Languages can be visuals, they can be equations, they can be words, they can be sounds, they can be emotions, intuitions, or physical changes. For example, in terms of the physical changes, one may express what they want to say through dance or through some sort of movement. So we can say people who talk with their hands, well, they're just expressing themselves rather creatively. We also tend to fail to use our senses. We have a number of senses, and sometimes we bank on only one or two of them rather than using the whole set of them. And each of the senses is also a language for creative problem solving. And just as a little take-home piece of homework, in terms of, say you want to pick your clothes for tomorrow, how are you going to pick them? Some people may pick them in terms of what they look like. Some may pick them in terms of what they feel like on the body, and so on and so forth. So for whatever sense that you use to pick your clothes, try to use another sense tomorrow that's out of your norm and see how different that feels. Okay, and continuing with the perceptual freedom, we also have the final point, and that's using all of your abilities. Have you ever been in the situation where your mind knows the answer, you're sure you've got the answer, but you're blocked from using it? Like you've got the gut feel, it's there, but it's stuck. This is a very interesting point in being able to get what's sitting inside you and having it come out and surface so that you can use it, quote, in the real world. What happens is that behavior repertoires are also determined by our attitudes towards ourselves. So if a particular skill or talent does not fit our self-image, we simply don't use that talent well. And now we move on to cultural freedom. And in cultural freedom, we have issues such as going beyond logical linear thinking, eliminating stereotyping, and we've got playing, fantasizing, and daydreaming, and breaking the status quo. Now, to be free culturally means that we have to break away from those cultural attitudes that inhibit our creativity. And cultural attitudes tend to dictate to one of what is wrong, what is right, what is impossible, and what is possible. So if we go to the first one, go beyond logical linear thinking, how often have you heard, now let's be logical about this? In our society, we tend to reward, promote, encourage rational, logical, linear thinking. And thinking patterns or types where you're using intuitions, feelings, and other nonlinear modes tend to be the underdog. So if you've ever had a hunch or a feeling and then you've acted upon it, then you know the value of your own intuition. The next point, eliminate stereotyping. This is pretty straightforward. There are assumptions that gender determines abilities, and there are also assumptions that lack of formal or advanced training hamper abilities. And we're talking here creative abilities. And we have to break away from that sort of stereotyping. Playing, fantasizing, and daydreaming. Well, children are allowed to play, and adults are expected to grow up. But being creative, it means that you must be willing and able to play. And you have to be able to play with your ideas, with materials, and with reality. So we can think of creativity as being a type of mental play. So what you have to do here is when you're in your creative stage, you just have to relax your grown-up inhibitions and let your mind go out to play more often. We've got fantasies. It's common perception that one who fantasizes too much, that means that they're maladjusted. One who daydreams too much is non-productive. Well, yes, if it's taken to extremes, but much creative thinking comes from this sort of thing of playing, fantasizing, and daydreaming. And the final one is to break the status quo. We do have one of the greatest unspoken commandments. It's very, very rarely said, if at all, but I'll say it here. And it's, thou shalt not try anything new. Now, maybe you haven't been told that overtly, but you can really feel it when someone means that to you. So tradition and status quo are liked, and they are well known, and they're very comfortable. And change can be rather uncomfortable, disliked, and very scary. And they tend to be very much resisted by our society. But what we must do is to be able to break away from that. So this wraps up the section on the freedom to create. We've got the emotional, the perceptual, and the cultural freedoms. Once it's time for Alan's presentation, he'll give an organizational perspective, but we'll wait until it's Alan's turn. And I have to stick in another exercise here first. Next slide. And to really round out the picture, we also tend to have misconceptions about creativity. And these misconceptions are that one thinks that creativity requires great skills, high levels of intelligence, and artistic talent. None of this is true. In terms of great skill, you can think of two phases to the creative process. One being the inspiration phase, and that's what requires the creativity. The other phase is the working out and the development of the inspiration. And that's what requires more skill and experience. The next one, the high levels of intelligence. In order to be creative, you must have very high levels of intelligence. Well, no, not true. Tests have shown that beyond the minimum level of intelligence, there is no correlation between intelligence and creative abilities. And then artistic talent. People tend to think, or one tends to think that creative ability is equal to artistic talent. And that's not true. Although artistic talent is just one of the very many ways that one can express a piece of creativity. Now, I'm going to review the creative attitude so we don't forget. And again, we must maintain a very positive mindset, relax, suspend our judgment, open our awareness and perceptions, and allow yourself to be creative. And this takes us to our next exercise. And I'm sure you've got the hang of this by now. You're going to have a minute to look at this, and you're going to be allocated with a task of coming up with a title for this piece of art. Okay, Alan, start running the microphone here.
Okay, we'll start in the back of the room this time.
Ow, my head hurts. I hate it when it does this.
Well, it seems the two objects there are playing and they're having fun.
Looks like a domestic appliance cow person to me.
It seems like there's a screen there and there is a person's head. It seems it's reflecting a person that watches too much TV.
That was my thought too. The ultimate couch potato.
Some people with their hands up.
I see it not as a reflection on the person watching TV, but on TV itself, with the tangled mess and perhaps the image on the face is society watching back. So I'd title it Television.
The Canadian Radio Television Telecommunications Committee.
Okay, one more.
I'd call it Man Digests Society or something like that.
Okay. Okay, for those of you who want to put your hands up.
What we have here is designed by committee.
I don't think it needs a title. I think it speaks for itself, whatever it says.
Interactive television.
Okay. Is over by the wall? Yeah. Right off the wall.
Off the wall it is.
Yeah.
This is a picture of the Star Trek Academy a flight manual, and it's distributed to flight deck officers, and the caption on the picture is "Typical transporter failure."
And one more in the front row. No, it's okay. I had the same one. You had the same one. Okay, two people were thinking alike. She had the same one. Okay. When I saw the name or the title for this piece of art, I was really impressed. I was impressed with yours too. But the artist for this was Edward Kienholz, and he put this together in 1963, and he called it Gossip. Okay, now to wrap up this section on personal creativity, we have creativity starts with an attitude, and it fosters certain energies, and we also need freedom. Keep this in mind, and right now we're going to move on to Alan's part of the presentation, where he focuses on the organizational aspects with respect to the Disney organization.
It's hot under that overhead. The course was the Disney approach to creative leadership. And I'm not sure how many people are aware, but there is such a thing as Disney University. And they do give a small but select number of courses to help people understand how Disney works, what the success factors are behind it, and how it manages some of the largest entertainment venues in the world. The Disney University is now centered at Walt Disney World in Orlando. And as Sonia said, the course I went to concerns how to maintain creativity within an organization. And what I'm going to give you is my summary of their words. And being an entertainment company, the course is entertaining. But there are undoubtedly dark sides of Disney, which they chose not to talk about, since that's not what Disney entertainment is all about. Next. As I mentioned, it is at Disney World in Orlando, Florida, and they make quite extensive use of the facilities. We visited Epcot Center twice to talk about, or to actually see, the end result of a creativity study that was presented in the course. And we also went to the Disney MGM Grand Studio theme park and backstage into the Disney animation to see how processes are implemented there. The audience for this seminar, there were about 50 people. There were employees from all levels of organizations and from both the private and public sector. The course was as entertaining, and what I found especially remarkable about the course is its internal consistency. They did in the course what they talked about they do in their organization, and it was up to the typical Disney standards of excellence. So I was really quite impressed. If we look at how they discuss their success in the next slide, you'll see it's really quite simple. And this dates all the way back to Walt Disney. And what his goals were is that if you have a quality cast experience, and all employees of Disney are called cast members, and if you give your guests, your customers, a quality experience, then you have a future as a company. And from its inception to a period I'll talk about, it catapulted Disney into the position of probably one of the premier entertainment companies in the world. So if we go on to the next slide, we can see in a little more detail how they describe what they do. And what you'll notice is that everything is simple. And one of the messages I hope to convince you of is organizational creativity is as simple as individual creativity. There's nothing complicated about it. In fact, it's usually the uncreative forces that start complexifying and throwing roadblocks, as Sonia talked about. Dreaming and doing is what they call management of creativity. They talk about leadership. Okay, you have to decide what your goal is. Disney is, and they consume in their every action, the premier entertainment company, be it on film or be it in their theme parks. They know what they're doing, they're entertaining. They describe themselves very much in terms of teamwork, and you'll see this throughout the presentation. Everything they describe is done in teams. And in fact, we're going to find out some very unusual teams at Disney Animation. And everything they do is planned. I mean, sometimes we have the impression, we talk about the desire for order being a limiting factor in creativity and the need occasionally for chaos. Well, Disney talked about how you can plan when to have chaos and when to turn it off. Next slide. So going one step lower into the topic, they talked about creativity by showing it to you. The first thing they talk about is their heritage. And their heritage is animation. And animation is teamwork at Disney. Everyone is co-located. And this includes, by the way, the financial people. So if the financial people want to cut $200,000 from the budget of a movie, guess who's right outside their door? The senior animators, the junior animators, the camera work people, and everyone else involved. So there's no hiding. So the team begins to build an understanding of why what happens, and the team is given opportunities to create new values from catastrophes. You know, rather than looking at how do you cut $200,000, they look at what kind of opportunities are created. And they tell the story about one film. It involves a certain scene where the film was over budget and they decided to cut this scene. But they had to get the story. They had to maintain the integrity of the story. So what they did is they had the main characters talking to a person off camera who was talking into an intercom. And in fact, this turned out to be one of the funniest scenes because you have a daughter screaming into an intercom at these parents who you never see because they could not afford the apartment of the parents, they didn't want the actors, they didn't want to set up the camera. So this woman is screaming into an intercom, trying to get into her parents' house, and her parents are saying, no, all you want is more money. And then at the very end of the scene, a check comes floating out of above the camera, down onto the person, and you can hear the mother yelling at the father, I told you not to give her that money. So out of the adversity of trying to cut the budget of this film, they created, in fact, one of the funniest moments in the film. They work very systematically. As you know, Disney started in animation, and they have a 9-step process. The process begins with a story. In fact, everything at Disney begins with a story. There's a story behind Epcot, behind Walt Disney World. If you don't know the story, you're not going anywhere. From there, it goes into what's often called the storyboard, or the visual development, where you start plotting out how the characters move, what the scenes look like. That continues into a more complete story sketch, continues into specifications, which they call the story layout, which then goes into the animation process, and you can see the other steps. They have built their other processes at Disney from this outline. And if we can see the next slide, you'll see the process for the design and engineering of amusements. And first step, if you can remember from the animation, was the story. The first step in an amusement ride is blue skying. Someone has a theme. Let's build a haunted house. And it goes from there. What is this thing called a haunted house? The animation visual development parallels the concept development. Okay, now that we have some idea about the story we want to tell in this haunted house, let's start putting pen and ink to paper and sketching it out. The story sketch, which was the third step, goes into the feasibility level. Okay, how do we get this to work? The layout, where we talked about increasing the detail of a story in a film, translates into the schematic design. Okay, let's start putting iron and sticking the shovel in the ground, and let's see how we're going to actually build it. Once that is developed, it goes on to design development. As a Disney movie goes on to animation, and then the following steps. But for everything Disney does, they had a procedure like this, which they could tell the story of how it relates to their heritage, which is animation. And it really was quite incredible. It's not to say that everything they do is a 9-step process. It's that everything they do has a process, and it all begins with some kind of creative event, be it identifying a story or some kind of blue sky brainstorming session. Okay. What I'd like to do next is actually give you a sample of some of their creativity tools. And I don't know any of your backgrounds, so some of you probably have taken courses in brainstorming or idea mapping. There is nothing unique about these tools. They're all in the public literature. They all have purposes. Brainstorming is often good when you have no idea what you're doing, but you've got a theme, just as they used it in the amusement design. Role-playing. If you've ever seen a movie about how they make a Disney movie, they will often focus on animators who act like tigers, or animators who are trying to feel a flying carpet. They do a lot of role-playing to gain a better understanding of what they're doing. For more developed ideas, they have techniques such as defining parameters, which is very much like idea mapping. You would say, okay, we have a restaurant. Rather than starting from a sheet, you start from, you have a restaurant. Okay, what's the food like? What's the seating like? What's the ambience like? So it's a little more rigid, but it is still allows for a lot of creative latitude. Now, the one I found really interesting, and which I'm going to tell a story about, is controlled chaos, because this is the one technique I hadn't seen before, but it made a lot of sense. I don't know if any of you have been, how many people have been to the MGM Grand theme park, Disney MGM Grand? Okay, I'm seeing maybe 10% of the hands around here. There is, if you've been recently, there is a new restaurant called the Sci-Fi Diner. And in the Sci-Fi Diner, you sit in cut-up cars, okay, looking at a mock-up of a drive-in screen. And they have the old-fashioned tabletop music boxes. And the waiters and waitresses move around in these cars and serve you meals. This was developed with a controlled chaos technique. And what's unusual, or what is usual at Disney, is this was developed by the restaurant and hotel employees themselves. In the controlled chaos, what they do is they assembled their brainstorming team. The brainstorming team is run with the help of a moderator. Keeps the flow going. Many of you have probably been in brainstorming sessions with moderators. But there's one other person in the room, and that is the client. In this case, it was the business manager of restaurant and refreshments for MGM Grand theme park. What happens is the client takes no part in the brainstorming. They sit there, they listen, the moderator moves the session along, and then at every so often, the example for the time limit for the Sci-Fi Diner was 1 hour. The moderator calls a timeout, and all of the brainstorming participants leave the room. The client and the moderator then discuss what has happened over that past hour. What is good? What is bad? Is it meeting the client's goals? Is it going in the right direction? Brainstorming people come back in the room. The moderator delivers the feedback to the brainstormers, not the client. And if you can recall some of what impressed me about this technique, and it's also one of the reasons Sonia and I put the two talks together, what were some of Sonia's blocks were don't want to be embarrassed, afraid of running dry, afraid of criticism. Well, what they found is by the moderator giving the feedback to the brainstormers, they depersonalize the feedback. It isn't the client going, no, I don't like that idea. It isn't the client going, I don't know how we're going to get this restaurant built on time. It's the moderator going, okay, we feel, the moderator's using the we, the group isn't going in the right direction, or we really like this idea. And it depersonalizes the whole brainstorming process. And it led up to the design of this Sci-Fi Diner. By the way, in this particular story, they told us about a few bugs in the process. For example, the hotel, the brainstormers, wanted the waiters and waitresses to be on roller skates. Well, when they actually built the restaurant and the waiters and waitresses came out during the dry running process, they just about killed themselves. So the roller skates were ditched real fast. But again, the theme of the restaurant was intact. Didn't really matter. The roller skates are, in fact, of that era of the drive-in movie, but were not in the drive-in movie, so it was not critical to the story. If you ever go to the Sci-Fi Diner, and you'll notice that the license plates are from various states, and all have 3 letters on the license plates. Those are the initials of the brainstormers who designed and proposed this whole diner. And it's one way that Disney acknowledges the contribution of their employees. When they said this came to mind. The early Macintosh, in fact, on the inside of the case, had the signature of the principal developers. So just one of those ways in which Disney thanks their people in terms of recognition. Now, so far, I'm telling a very rosy story, and you'd think, well, Disney must have had a pure and pristine existence for its corporate life, but it didn't. In fact, starting in the late 70s and early 80s, Disney was on the decline. They were putting out very mediocre movies. If I were to ask people how many remember Herbie the Love Bug Part 4, exactly. It was not one of the most memorable movies Disney ever made. The movies were very expensive. They were sucking up the revenues from the parks. The stock was put in jeopardy, and the company was put in the position of a hostile takeover. They hadn't changed their formula, but something was going wrong. Next slide. What had happened, and some of you who read the business pages probably followed it for a while, is a guy named Michael Eisner came in and arranged financing and turned a hostile takeover situation into a friendly takeover. And they give Eisner quite a lot of credit. He understood what Disney was all about. He understood the corporate culture. He introduced himself to the Disney employees after a parade and a party, and his speech was given from the steps of Cinderella's castle. He understood the power of the show. In addition, his speech began with he would like to welcome himself to their company, although it was from his phrasing, which essentially, as the people who were there described it, you heard a 15,000 person sigh of relief, because it was a very direct statement that he was going to help them rediscover their goals. And what he said was there was nothing wrong with the original formula. There was just something missing. You must have a quality cast experience. Your employees have to be supportive and active in your company. You have to have a quality guest experience. If the people aren't happy, they don't come back. But there was nothing incompatible with those two with a quality business experience. And what he brought to Disney was the business experience that was necessary to survive to today. Next slide. The original, what I've been doing a lot, in the original three circles intersected on what was called storytelling. And as you'll see, I'm trying to tell a story. It's something one has to learn. And we've been trying through this presentation to put more stories into it. To add a quality business experience, all you do is add two more intersections. And you get what's in the next slide. Which is, if you're worried about business, you have to be worried about creating value. And this is both monetary value and value to the customer. You also have to be worried about synergy. And in the next part of this talk, I want to describe to you how value creation and synergy were implemented in the Disney company. Okay, so the first slides we'll talk about are synergy. Next one. You may recall when I was young and when some of you were young, Disney movies came out and then they went away. And if you were good at timekeeping, 7 years later, the movie came back again. Fantasia, every once in a while, came back. Snow White and Seven Dwarfs came back. They were sitting on a gold mine. Okay. But they were sitting on it, literally. And what Eisner said is, we can use these movies. We can create value from these movies beyond just dusting them off and sending them out into the theater every 7 years. And the best example they picked Beauty and the Beast because it's one of those examples where they started from fresh. Eisner was firmly in the company during the planning of Beauty and the Beast, and the company had been over that shock. And what you can see is Beauty and the Beast did not come out, go back into the vault, and come out again in 7 years. It came out into video. There are publications, various storybooks that use the Beauty and the Beast themes. If you've been to the parks, the Disney parks, there's lots of merchandise. There's music, CDs came out of the Disney music. There are attractions that were developed around the themes. And there were television segments. The film was used in TV commercials. through this planning, through this desire to create value, they can take a story. The story is not diminished by the creation of additional values. In fact, the story gets enhanced because you're not only making a movie, but you're making a whole line of products around it. So it's a win-win situation. Next slide. Now, that was synergy. What about creating new value? How do you create new value? Again, in Disney, it's simple. All business proposals have two questions to answer. Why is it Disney? And why is it different? If you cannot answer those questions, don't dare talk to Michael Eisner, because he will toss you out on your ear. And what I'd like to do, those questions, by the way, date all the way back to the development of Disneyland. Walt was often taking his children out, and one of the places you took children out in those days were carnivals. The Shriners Carnival, Ringling and Brothers, Barnum and Bailey. But what his feeling was is Carnival is no place for kids. I mean, you had the Midway and the questions about will those 3 bowling pins really fall down, or is it rigged when I throw the softball that you threw with the 3 bowling pins, and you never quite knew whether they were rigged or not. The employees at carnivals were kind of like whoever was available, and that the carnies were sometimes shaven, sometimes bathed, and from his point of view, no place for kids. But he saw the opportunity to entertain. He wanted to go beyond films into entertaining. So what he saw as Disneyland was an entertaining environment that was for children. And you can look at Disney's dress code, has been attacked many times. People have made a lot of fun of it. But it is the direct descendant of Walt Disney's reaction that a carnival is no place for children. The employees should be clean, the environment should be clean, everything should be fair, and people should be entertained. Now, needless to say, with that many creative people doing films at Disney Films, they wanted to expand. Okay, but Disney Film was known. They knew their purpose, to produce G films. Parents never had a problem taking their kids to a Disney film. So, do they jeopardize the label, or do they find a creative alternative? And I don't know if you realize, but Touchstone Entertainments is a wholly owned subsidiary of Walt Disney. Why is it Disney Touchstone films are entertaining? Why is it different? A Touchstone film does not have to get a G rating. So what they did is they've maintained Disney's G rating. Any parent can rent any Disney video, any Disney film, and they know what they're getting. They're getting a story, and they're getting children's entertainment. Just as a sideline, there was a lot of anxiety, if any of you have seen Bambi, when Bambi's mother dies. That was a very controversial event in Disney's history because it wasn't happy. But the story finally won out, and Bambi's mom was shot off camera. And to this day, the old-timers still wonder whether Bambi's mother had to die. In Touchstone, you can kill people. You do it cleanly. Okay? You're not going to see Arnold Schwarzenegger come out with a gun that throws God knows how many bullets per second and turns someone into hamburger before your eyes. You will see entertainment, but it will not necessarily have to be G. So why is it Disney? Why is it different? The basis of Touchstone. The final story was in fact a real challenge. In southern Florida, there is a massive industry at what are called timeshares. Anyone own a timeshare here? Timeshare is where you buy like 2 weeks at an apartment or a condo, hopefully at a vacation spot. The reason I say hopefully is because the timeshare industry really had an awful, awful name in southern Florida. people were flown down, stuck in rooms that were equivalent to jail cells, and browbeaten until they signed their life away. If they couldn't pay their contract for this 2 weeks at a hotel or wherever, everything was repossessed. Some of the hotels never got built. The companies went bankrupt, disappeared into the Bahamas. It was turning into a disaster area. And someone came to Disney with the idea, Disney should be in timeshare. And they quaked. But there is a value in timeshare, okay, that there could be if they could figure out how to make a Disney timeshare, because they surely did not want Mickey Mouse knocking on your door and repossessing your house. Okay, that was not Mickey Mouse's role in life. So they sent it back to this person who brought the idea up. They said, make it Disney and make it different. Make it entertaining and make it different than the real nightmare of the South Florida timeshares. Through a series of proposals and through the largest corps of lawyers that Disney has ever hired, what they decided was the Disney Vacation Club. No mention of timeshare. And what you do in a Disney Vacation Club is you buy points. These points, excuse me, dry mouth. These points can then be spent at any Disney resort with a Disney Vacation Club. They are also very rapidly signing alliances with other timeshares in other areas that allow the points to become transferable, because that is an element of timeshare nowadays. Nobody wants to take their vacation for the rest of their life in the same apartment, same time every 2 weeks. And what they did is they used some of the Disney strengths. For example, when you buy points in Disney, you don't get a specific apartment. Sometimes if you want to come down with your whole family or with 10 friends, you can use those points to get a large condominium for, say, 2 weeks off-peak. And if you and a smaller number of people want to go down during a peak period, you'll get a smaller condominium or hotel. The facilities that are not in use as a vacation club are hotel rooms in the Disney organization. So it removed some of the pressure to make sure that all the rooms were sold. That reduced the pressure on the salespeople to sell. In fact, one of the unique items of the sales for Disney Vacation Club is if you go down to Disney World and if you decide to take the discussion and the tour of the Disney Vacation Clubs, in that process you will be surveyed up to 5 different times to see, was it a pleasant process, were you informed. If you sign a contract, you will be surveyed before that contract is actually sent to the lawyers to make sure you fully understood what you did. After your first trip to the vacation club, you are surveyed again. If any of those surveys start taking a dive, the sales force is penalized. Their compensation is based both on their sales performance and on the performance of the survey. So if they start putting people under heat, if they start using very confusing jargon, consumer ratings drop and their salaries take a hit. So they have done it, they have built in the focus on the customer, that no, you're not there to rook the customer. And this development, by the way, is quite successful. They are building new developments as fast as they want to, because like I said, anything that isn't sold is rented. And it really is quite a pleasant experience if any of you are down to Disney World and want to spend the afternoon with the Vacation Club people. This is not a paid announcement. So, to wrap up, as Sonia said, we were talking about these presentations, and as we've worked with them, they sure seem to have become more and more similar. Sonia talked about individual attitude, that you can be creative. talked about the freedom to be creative, that you have to grant yourself that freedom. And the energy. I mean, do it when you're best. If you're not a morning person, don't try and be creative in the morning. I've discussed Disney and said, well, gee, Disney creativity, the management of creativity comes down to teamwork. You know, have to work together. Leadership. Disney is the premier entertainment company in the world. They like to think so, and I'm sure they would be up in the top 3 maybe. And planning. That yes, you can plan creativity. And we said, gee, with 3 there and 3 here, they've got to go together. And got together, did a little brainstorming, and fancy this, some interesting assertions. Leadership is, in fact, an attitude. In an individual, you think you're a leader, you think you can do it. In a company, you're a leader. Teamwork and energy. If many of you have probably been faced with a problem in a team, and what's really great about a team is if one person is blocked, the other people can kind of unstick it, or you can use the team's energy if one person isn't so bright one day, the team can pick up, and you can use the energy you can use the team itself to create additional energy. And the last one is planning and freedom. And when we first looked at this, we said, gee, isn't this a contradiction? But in fact, it isn't. When you decide that you are going to start a process by planning, you give yourself the freedom to decide what you're going to do in that process. You give yourself the opportunity to take advantage of a brainstorming technique, a 6-hat techniques, whatever tool that your environment uses or whatever tools that you like to use personally. In fact, you force yourself to do it through planning. So we thought this was kind of neat, that there really is nothing too complicated about this whole thing called creativity and this thing called creative management. It's just maintaining a perspective that leadership and attitude is one region. Teamwork and energy, you can't divide them. A person can only create so much energy. 1 plus 1 can equal 3 in a good team. And that planning allows freedom. If you're not going to plan your exercise, you're probably not going to be free at certain periods to do any brainstorming or to explore any other paths. But if you allow for planning, you get the freedom with it. Have I missed anything?
Nope.
So with that, we hope you've enjoyed this discussion. And we thank you all for coming. We've been kind of flattered by the response here. And we hope you found it worthwhile. Thank you very much.